Hi, this is Dripta. Welcome to the second lecture of week 1. What is knowledge of language? I hope you remember whatever we had discussed in the last class, and we talked about certain ideas that we will repeat in today's class as well. I hope you can also revise them. So, in this lecture we will be talking about Chomsky's idea and the paradigm shift that took place with Chomsky. We will be talking about the attack on the behaviorist approach that I briefly mentioned in the last lecture. You also learnt about the concept of Plato's problem in the last class that we will be linking with today's class. We will learn about something called judgment of languages, and we will also talk about the idea of structure dependence. So, just to remind you whatever we had discussed in the last class, I have listed a couple of points which you can quickly go through. We talked about the idea that language is human. In linguistics, we are not talking about other communication systems. For us, language is human language, and linguistics is the study of human language, which is different from traditional grammar. I hope you remember that we talked about this idea of prescriptive tradition. So, we are not going to deal with prescriptive tradition in linguistics or for this course. And we talked about different perspectives and definitions of language, the AI perspective, the psychology, philosophy perspective, and the social science perspective, just to remind you. And we talked about a program called mental grammar, and we will be talking about generation of unlimited sentences in this class, which is related to the notion that I introduced previously. So, coming back to Chomsky's approach of language, we are talking about this paradigm shift. If you remember the idea of attack against behaviorist paradigm, the idea that human beings do not learn language by imitation is basically challenged by Chomsky, and he gave a very new definition of language that you already know. So, this change and drastically different definition of language and this change in idea is referred to as a paradigm shift in the discipline. So, some people, basically some philosophers in the 17th century asked questions related to the properties of language and mind. So, Chomsky referred to those questions and asked some very important questions. What constitutes a person's knowledge of language? So, this is the topic of today's class, and when we are saying that we are trying to understand the idea called knowledge of language, we are taking help of Chomsky, because he is the person who asked this question, what constitutes a person's knowledge of language? So, we already talked about this idea that children use sentences that they actually never heard. So, how is this possible? We talked about this idea of poverty of stimulus, if you remember. So, we will be coming back to them. We shall be exploring different questions related to language in this course. I hope you already understood that. And we will not move to a very deep theoretical aspect of or theories of language and mind. If you are interested in that, you can access a wide range of literature available, but for this course we are asking some basic questions related to the knowledge of language. So, Chomsky attacked the behaviorist approach of language learning, and it is if you remember, I used the term acquisition as opposed to learning, and he said that language is not learned through imitation, and every person can produce and understand different combinations of words. So, I was talking about this idea, but let us now focus on this term combination of words. Human beings can produce and understand different combination of words even if they did not hear them or uttered them before. So, pause and think about this idea of combinations of words. You can combine different words in certain ways, right. I mean, you cannot randomly combine them, but there are certain instincts within ourselves. So, basically the program that we mentioned, the program helps us to understand and produce certain constructions which are following the combinations of words, and there are different combination of words which is permissible in different languages. The brain must have some programs that can build unlimited sentences. So, we are saying that there is some program associated with our brain, and it can build unlimited sentences out of finite words. So, this is the definition of Chomsky, the definition of language given by Chomsky that we already discussed in the last class. I hope you remember. Let us go through one more longer excerpt from Chomsky's work from 1975. The language each person acquires is a rich and complex construction hopelessly underdetermined by the fragmentary evidence available to the child. Nevertheless, individuals in a speech community have developed essentially the same language. This fact can be explained only on the assumption that these individuals employ highly restrictive principles that guide the construction of grammar. So, there are a couple of keywords. I am sure that you are highlighting them for yourself when you are going through it along with me. So, complex construction, and the individuals employ highly restrictive principles. So, why we are saying that it is highly restrictive, which are guiding the construction of grammar. So, I am asking you to think more about it. And I will also ask you to think about these points that I have listed, because these are very important for us to know when we move to the new discipline. So, we pay attention to what we are saying. I briefly indicated this idea in the last lecture as well, but we do not pay attention to how we are saying them, right. So, I mean, if you are talking to someone, you of course you think about what to say, etc., but how we are saying them, I mean, we never explored that, right, because you know we take it for granted. We think that okay, we will say, but what is the magic mechanism that is helping us to say them is actually the big question mark for us, the linguists. The human beings have certain abilities to produce and understand infinite number of sentences. This is something that we are repeating again and again, but the next part is new, and judge whether they are correct or incorrect. So, this idea of judgment is very new to us, and we have to think about it. So, you can highlight this part, judge, for yourself, because you are also thinking about the correctness. So, if I randomly say an incorrect sentence in front of you, and if you happen to understand the language, you will quickly tell me that this is incorrect. So, this is something which is done by the program we are talking about. So, immediately they will say that there is something wrong with the combinations of words, so something is problematic. And I will also ask you to think about the third bullet point. Less educated people do not speak a simpler or coarser language. Many of us have this misconception that if people are less educated, their speech will be simple or rustic or coarse. So, this is a misconception, and we should know that for each and every human being, the capacity of language is complex, and all the human beings are gifted with this capacity. So, we are basically indicating a puzzle which is very important for us to know. So, you already learnt about the Plato's problem, how do we know so much from so little input? And if you have already started thinking about it, the idea of Plato's problem, I'm sure you have entered the domain of the puzzle that we are indicating, and of course it is related to the idea of poverty of stimulus that I also indicated in the previous lecture. So, how do children learn so much from so little input? So, if you observe any child around you, you will see that they talk a lot and they also understand quite a lot. So, how does this happen? This is indicated by the idea of the poverty of stimulus. So, this is basically a mystery for language. How do we get the knowledge of language? I mean, how can we do so much? I mean, what is it? So, that is the mystery. Now, let me introduce you to a very important notion again given by our guru Chomsky, the innateness hypothesis. What does it mean? It means that we have a genetic endowment for language that helps us to acquire language. So, when I am saying that there is a genetic endowment, of course, I mean we are indicating biological issue, which is, and that is why when I talked about this inclusion of cognitive concepts in the while discussing the idea of language, it is very important for us to remember those ideas. So, innateness hypothesis is a concept, a Chomskyan concept that will be used by us in future as well, and I am requesting you to remember this and if possible highlight this, because we the capacity of language that I was referring to in the previous slide as well, I was basically indicating this hypothesis, the innateness hypothesis. And when we are talking about this mystery of language, how do people utter and understand some sentences which are completely unheard for them and unused by them, then we are basically entering the domain of the mystery, which is of course related to the question of the knowledge of language. And you should know that people are working on the issues related to knowledge of language for almost 7 decades. I hope you remember that Chomsky's work appeared in 1957, and when he talked about this very new definition of language, and since then people are working, and people have actually worked a lot. There is a wide range of literature available on these questions, the knowledge of language questions, and you can access them in future as well. It is also important for us to know that this model, which is talking about the puzzle of language, it is also a reference point and a very helpful model for other domains of cognition. So, the model of knowledge of language is basically a model for many other components of cognitive science, for example, computer science, psychology, and you can talk about specific modules of cognition as well. So, they talk about the knowledge of language questions, and they learn a lot from the knowledge of language questions. Now, let us talk about the idea of modularity. What is modularity? Again, a notion discussed by Chomsky, and the first point that I have given here is humans are complex and human mind or brain is notoriously complex. So, I borrow this term from Neil Smith, and when it is said that it is notoriously complex, you can understand why this construction is used, right. I mean it is extremely complex, and human mind is argued to be modular, and you can say, and I think some of you already know that there are different modules for vision, audition, face recognition, etc. So, and they have separable faculties and different generalizations. So, Chomsky argued that, and he argued for several decades, that the language faculty is a separate module. So, that is why we are using the word modularity. Language faculty is a different module of our mind. So, language faculty is a module of the mind is a very new notion for some of us, right. So, we basically pause here and start thinking about the very new way of addressing the idea of language. It is not a very simple definition from our school grammar book. So, it is becoming a much bigger and larger and much important question, right. So, the language module also has different sub modules. These sub modules are related to sound, structure and meaning. So, in future when we will be talking about different layers of linguistic analysis, we will be talking about these components again. We will come back to this because sound, structure and meaning, this is very important for all of us. Now, I have a small exercise for you. I will ask you to read the sentence. A blue cat is in the park. And if I ask a very basic question to you, how do we create an interrogative from sentence A? Interrogative, you understand, questions. So, you can simply say, is the blue cat in the park? This is okay, right? I mean, this is perfectly grammatical. But if I ask you, what is the strategy for creating the interrogative sentence? So, you can pause, think about it and tell me, we move the first is of the sentence to the front of the sentence. So, is this the strategy? Let us see. Now, I am taking another sentence. A blue cat who is drinking a cup of milk is in the park. How do we create a sentence from this? The strategy that we have created previously is you move the first is, right. So, we are moving the first is a blue cat who drinking a cup of milk is in the park. This is absolutely wrong, right. I mean, you cannot say this. And even if English is not our mother tongue, but with the basic knowledge of English, we can say that this is absolutely wrong. So, let me also tell you that we write ungrammatical sentences with this particular symbol, and you should remember this because it is important for you. What is this exercise telling us? It is telling us that our knowledge of language is structure dependent. It is not random. Not every string of words constitute a well formed sentence in a language or any well formed sentences in a language. So, I am highlighting a string of words and well formed sentences here. Please make a note for yourself that these are extremely important constructions. So, string of words, any string of words cannot create well formed sentence. So, well formed is a technical term, and as opposed to this term we can also use the term ill formed sentences. So, there are certain constraints of language and we will be talking about these constraints in detail in future, but at this point it is very important for you to know. So, what are the basic ideas that we are gaining from this lecture? Knowledge of language is complex and structure dependent. We do recognize sentences as grammatical or ungrammatical because of our knowledge of language. So, the very small exercise that we did together, we tried to form questions from two sentences, and we also figured out very quickly that one is okay and one is not okay. So, this recognition of grammatical and ungrammatical sentences are basically done with the help of our knowledge of language. As Chomsky says, a person who knows a language has mastered a system of rules that assign sound and meaning in a definite way for an infinite class of possible sentences. If you are highlighting for yourself, you can also highlight set system of rules and sound and meaning, definite way, infinite class, possible sentences. All these are very important for us because we are trying to understand this new mechanism. So, now in a nutshell, our knowledge of language is associated with a number of concepts. Our knowledge of language X or Y enables us to produce and understand any of an indefinitely large number of sentences, and we can make judgments of well formedness We can say whether a sentence is well formed or ill formed very quickly, and we can also make judgments on the sentences that we have never heard of. Maybe it is a completely new sentence, but you can quickly tell us whether it is grammatical or ungrammatical, whether it is well formed or ill formed. This is very important. So, there is a very famous sentence that I have listed to the next point. Please consider the sentence: colorless green ideas sleep furiously. So, do you consider that this sentence is grammatical? So, think about it, and if you are still thinking, let me tell you that this sentence is grammatical. Because you know the position of different words, the combination, the string of words, I mean there is no problem, but there is something else. What is that? It is related to the acceptability. So, this sentence is grammatical but unacceptable. So, along with the notion of grammaticality, let me also introduce you to the notion of acceptability, because these two are important together. And whenever you will be dealing with any sentence in any language as data, and if you are already familiar with the basics of linguistics, you already deal with data. So, you have to keep this in mind, that there is something called grammaticality and acceptability. So, the native speakers of any language can tell you that this is grammatical, but this is unacceptable. So, you have to stop there and work on it. This is important. So, now I have a small task for you that you can do by yourself. Please think about some sentences in your own language, whatever, I mean if you speak more than one languages, you can do this for all the languages actually. So, can you please list some sentences which are ungrammatical, and pause and think about it. This is not a very easy task, let me tell you, to create ungrammatical sentences. So, I am forcing you to create ungrammatical sentences so that you can think about the rules, think about the string of words, think about the combinations. So, and get some idea of the knowledge of language. So, if you can make a list of ungrammatical sentences in your language, it will be great. And if you can create a list of unacceptable sentences in your language after that. So, just to see the difference, just to see the contrast, then ask yourself how your knowledge of language can help you to produce judgments about sentences. So, you are capable of giving judgments related to ungrammaticality and unacceptability, and this is a part of your knowledge of language. So, what does it mean to know a language? If I ask you this question, there are a couple of concepts coming up, right? We need to think about them. So, our knowledge of language helps us to combine sounds to form words, words to form phrases and sentences. And if someone asks you the question, what does it mean to know a language? You can say this definition now. The answer can be, it means to know the rules and their combinations. So, when you did this exercise, ungrammatical, unacceptable sentence, of course, you thought about certain rules of your language. These are not listed somewhere in a grammar book, these are listed in your mind. It is a part of your system. So, it means to know the rules and their combinations in a language, which is a grammar. This is not the usual school grammar. So, there is a grammar which generates infinitely many possible sentences. So, we call this grammar universal grammar. So, we will talk about universal grammar, or in short UG, in future as well. So, when we say that we know a language, it means that we are being able to produce and understand infinite number of sentences never spoken before, and this particular feature of human language is known as creativity. So, when you will learn about different features of human language, you will be learning more about creativity. So, the idea of creativity is basically a milestone in the study of languages. So, let us sum up today's lecture. So, we shall be actually coming back to this idea of generating sentences later, And for now we know that this grammar in Chomskyan paradigm is known as generative grammar, and because it generates and whatever we have learnt in today's class, it will be important for us throughout this course. So, in conclusion, we can say that we can produce and understand infinite number of sentences even if we have never encountered them before. This is of course related to our knowledge of language. Children learn a lot from limited exposure. This is related to the Plato's problem and poverty of stimulus. Our brain has some programs specific for language, which is related to the innateness hypothesis, and our knowledge of language is complex and structure dependent. So, when we say that we know a language, it means knowing the rules of language, and universal grammar generates infinite sentences. I hope you remember all these, and there are key references for this lecture. Thank you.